Hello, my name is Kimberly Hill. I'm an associate professor of history at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I'm the author of A Higher Mission, The Careers of Alonzo and Althea Brown Edmiston in Central Africa. It came out with University Press of Kentucky in 2020. This is a book that talks about the history of connections between historically Black colleges and the African missions movement from the late 19th century up through the 1940s. It addresses the impact of industrial education as well as liberal arts-centered higher education in Americans' interactions with the colonial world in that time period. Also, what especially drew me into writing this project is that this book is a love story. It helps you get a glimpse into how two young people graduating from historically Black colleges could funnel their hopes, dreams, and eventual romance into 30 years of working with people on the other side of the world, of starting their own home, their own ministries, their own family, and defying so many expectations for what people who grew up as former sharecroppers were expected to accomplish in their lifetime in the early 20th century. Althea Brown was born in Alabama, and she attended Fisk University, graduated with a classics degree, and used that classics degree to become a very accomplished linguist in the Congo Free State, which became the Belgian Congo. She wrote the very first dictionary of the Kuba or Bouchon language, Kuba as K-U-B-A. By doing so, she helped to chronicle the history of one of the last large and great African kingdoms that remained exclusive and powerful even during the beginnings of Belgian colonialism. She got to know the beauty of this culture, its society, its orderliness, its royal structure, and she saw how that society faced many consequences with the incursion of the rubber industry, with the torture and displacement and oppression being brought by King Leopold II's representatives through the rubber company, through the local army, through various efforts to force local Africans to harvest rubber and eventually to grow cotton. Althea Brown had done work with cotton herself as a little girl, and it was likely that in Jim Crow America, she would have spent much of her adulthood doing likewise. Instead, she was a professional helping to document human rights atrocities in the Congo Free State, contributing to what became an international human rights campaign that forced King Leopold II to give up sole control of the Congo Free State colony that led to some reforms being developed in that part of the world. Althea Brown entered the Congo Free State in 1902, thinking that she would remain a single woman missionary, focusing on her dream of getting to know this language and this people group. But 2 years later, Alonzo Edmiston, a graduate of Stillman Presbyterian Seminary, entered the Congo Free State on what he thought was a short-term visit to help one of his professors bring supplies to the mission. When he got there, he started touring the different mission stations, and he met Althea Brown and decided almost immediately he was going to stay there for the rest of his life. They faced many difficult circumstances and emergencies together. He helped save her life when the mission station was attacked in 1904 He helped Althea Brown and her African-American colleagues rebuild that mission station. And together they started an agricultural college so that they could bring their expertise in language and art together with growing interest in industrial education. And they hoped that could create something similar to a Fisk University in the Belgian Congo. So far I've talked about the goals that Althea Brown and Alonzo Emmett had together to bring out more of the historical significance of this story. It's interesting to know that they were working for the Southern Presbyterian Church between 1902 up to Althea Brown's death in 1937 and Alonzo Edmiston's retirement in 1941. So in those years, 1902 to 1941, the Southern Presbyterian Church was quite segregated. It began as the Presbyterian Church of the Confederate States. It had been a church that had endorsed slavery. After emancipation, the Southern Presbyterian Church started sending teams of white and Black missionaries to Central Africa, mainly because that was the only way they saw to start this project. Althea Brown and Alonzo Edmiston's mentors were William and Lucy Gant Shepherd, two of the first African-American Presbyterians to go abroad as missionaries. And it was through their persistence, their belief that there could be viable communities that would help Africans get introduced to the Presbyterian Church, while also helping African Americans use their professional skills in a way that brought them recognition. It was through their persistence in trying to establish that in Central Africa that the Southern Presbyterian Church was able to establish a long-term mission abroad that became what's now the Presbyterian Church of Congo. Through this book, through teaching this kind of story, you can help students see connections between people of African descent in a transnational basis, and also how those connections changed over time. They can start with quotes that are in the book, then match those with photographs and records that are digitized through the Presbyterian Historical Society, and see how early African-American missionaries, such as William Henry Shepherd, brought in very Victorian civilizing language when they first started talking about the African people they were doing outreach to. But then going from the 1890s up through 1910s, 1920s, we can observe a shift through the Edmistons and how the African Americans are feeling much more personal connection to their African neighbors, a sense of mutual respect and a need for one another. They're showing more interest in African history, in African art, and in how Africans can help them redefine what family is about, what it means to accomplish justice along with evangelism. Another way that I enjoy using the stories of African-American missionaries in order to improve my teaching is to help students get their own sense of exploration. There are many records available through church archives, such as the Presbyterian Historical Society. There's also digitized newspapers from historically Black colleges like Hampton or Fisk. Those digitized newspapers include many letters coming from African Americans who were serving abroad up through the 1920s. Students can find those letters through Hothy Trust or through archives.org, and they can very likely make their own unique account of African Americans' discussions of their accomplishments overseas, their descriptions of African people, and maybe most interestingly, the growing sense of obligation to criticize colonial governments and how they were oppressing people of African descent in Congo, then in other parts of the African continent, eventually feeding into international sense of Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. I recommend a higher mission as a way to get students interested in studying the colonial era, in studying African American history, and in getting them to wake up some, to be ready for surprises. It's unlikely that they will have seen that many stories of African American missionaries, and knowing that there were African American men from Tennessee, Virginia, and Alabama walking around in pith helmets, hunting for rhinoceros and exploring rare kingdoms. It can make them start to ask questions about what else they haven't heard, what other heroes are out there to discover, what more is there to US history than what's standard in the textbooks. When they ask questions, that's when the process of learning can really become fruitful. So thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoy A Higher Mission, and I hope that you enjoy learning about the Edmistons.